Welcome to the NRC round. Where are we at now? I've gone blank. That's not very clever, is it? Round 6 predictions brought to you by DrivingMaul. Hi, I'm Paul, the guy behind DrivingMaul. Best place for predictions and opinion. Well, we can debate that, can't we? Is it the best place? Let's have a good old look. So here's my performance so far in the NRC. Top 40%, 65% success rate. Not that great. But anyway, hey, I did have that one perfect week. But apart from that, it has been a bit a bit all over the place. Not the best in this competition so far. But anyway, these are all for fun and for discussion rather than anything too serious. So let's have a quick look at what games we have got coming up this round or this week, or whatever you want to call it. So we have Fiji versus Canberra, or Fiji Drua versus Canberra Vikings. We have New South Wales Country versus Queensland Country versus Sydney Rays. New South Wales Country Eagles versus Brisbane City. Melbourne Rising versus Force. So basically, we've got the two country teams against the two city teams down up in with the Queensland versus New South Wales, or New South Wales versus Queensland. With those games. So how is it all going to pan out? So first up, Fiji Drua, top of the table, hosting Canberra Vikings, third in the table. Only 2 points separating them. Both got 4 wins and 1 loss. Fiji Drua's loss was clearly their first game on the road, and Canberra's loss was their first game of the season. They've not lost since then. That's when they lost to last year's winners. In Queensland country. So how do I see this one going? Well, so far Fiji at home have won by 23 points, 61 points and 41 points. So they've been big wins all the way through. But this is their toughest test at home. Still, you've got to say Fiji are hot favourites, and I'm going to put them by 10 in there, because I think some of the teams they've played so far have been a bit weaker. Now, will Canberra rest some players because of the trip out to Fiji? I don't know. One of the interesting things about Canberra Airport is the only place they fly to internationally is Fiji. So at least they didn't have to go via Sydney, whereas if they were going anywhere else in the world outside of Australia, they would have had to. Next up, Queensland Country versus Sydney Rays. Now, Queensland Country started off well, 3 wins on the trot. They've lost their last 2 to the Force, or Perth, and then to Brisbane City in that country versus city. It's going to clash, which is famous in New Zealand. The Sydney Rays, on the other hand, have lost every single one of their games. 4 games at home on the trot, then their first trip away to the Force over in Perth, they lost by 48 points. So you've got to say, the champs are going to have a pretty easy day of it, I think, against Sydney Rays, and I'm backing them to win by 15 and get themselves back on the winning run or back into the winning circle after losing their 2 games. Both of the New South Wales teams have been going pretty poorly. Not a great advert for the Shute Shield, and also part of the politics that's been going on. Hence, the Shute Shield went into the NRC season, whereas all the other teams were finished up and had some sort of pre-season. These 2 teams didn't. So New South Wales Country Eagles hosting Brisbane City. Brisbane City didn't start so well, but they've got 3 wins on the bounce now, going quite comfortably. New South Wales Country Eagles, their solitary win was against the Rays, and they've lost all their other games at home. I mean, they lost to Melbourne Rising by 55 points, but only by 7 points to Canberra Vikings. So I think they're going to lose. The only question comes down to how big is that margin going to be, and I'm going to back Brisbane by 7 in this one. Brisbane, if we look at, say they've had those 3 wins. They beat the Rays by 21, but they only beat the Melbourne Rising by 5. So perhaps I'm being a bit kind to the Country Eagles here. Perhaps I should go a bit bigger, considering the win that Brisbane got over the Rays. But the Country Eagles did beat them, so. Yeah, I think it'll be a win for Brisbane. Any questions the margin? Final game of the round. If we've had those 2 city versus country battles, and also at the top of the table we had sort of capital of Fiji versus capital of Australia. This last one is also got a good storyline behind it. Melbourne Rising versus the Force, or Perth Force. So Melbourne versus Perth. Obviously, the Force being kicked out, but the head coach of Super Rugby and the head coach and a lot of their players going to Melbourne Rebels. So this is this will be a bit of a grudge match between these two, but it's going to be a bit lopsided. Let's be honest. The Force, second in the table, 4 wins, 1 loss. That 1 loss was to Canberra on the road, whereas at home they've beaten Brisbane City and New South Wales Country Eagles and Sydney Rays. It's 2 of the easiest teams they've had at home, which is a bit and they've had all the harder games on the road. Even so, they still beat Brisbane City first up and Queensland Country. So they're going to win this one. Again, it's just a matter of how much. But those 2 wins weren't particularly big. Also, if we look at Melbourne, their solitary winners come over New South Wales Country Eagles. But at home, they did a bit better against Brisbane City. They only lost by 5 points. They've had 4 of their games on the road. Finally, they get to have some time at home, which is good for them. Even so, Perth, I think, will win this one quite comfortably. I'm going to back them by 7. I can't see them losing. It's just a matter, again, how big will that margin blow out to? So 2 home wins, 2 away wins. That's how I see things panning out. Why don't you let me know down below how you see the NRC going? Still a relatively young competition, still growing, obviously, and not being helped by some of the politics that's going on between the Shoot Shield clubs and the ARU. And we've seen another letter come out today from the from a group of people trying to get the clubs in a sort of breakaway organisation, which doesn't really help anything. Hopefully I'm going to get Hugh Cavell on for a video to talk about that. It does seem, let's be honest, if we look at the names named in that email, most of those guys are in their 70s. And look, the game has moved on. Trying to roll back and be the same as things were back in the 70s and 80s really isn't going to work now. You've got to, they've got to move with the times and realise that the NRC is the right way to go if they can just get behind it properly and stop trying to, or stop having all the infighting. So anyway, that's my opinion. Hopefully I'll be able to go into a bit more depth with Hugh, who has written a good piece on the Green and Gold Rugby website. So go over there and check that out. Actually, I'll whack a link in down below in the notes. So have a look in there for a link to that article that he's written about that. And do enjoy the rugby this weekend, and ignore the politics. Enjoy what happens on the field.